So thank you all for coming this evening. The Dyslexia Association of Ireland is delighted to welcome James Northridge as part of our Adult Dyslexia Webinar Series. James is a researcher, entrepreneur, and founder of Urability. In this webinar, he will discuss his early educational experiences managing his dyslexia and ADHD and how assistive technology transformed his learning. He'll also provide some top tips around assistive technology, disability and inclusion. So now I'm going to hand you over to James.
Fantastic. I was trying to make a few mental notes there of what you'd actually said so that I could make sure I cover all those things. Listen, I'm absolutely delighted, obviously, to be here. It's great to see so many people jump on live and really to have the opportunity, I suppose, to share back, you know, the journey, the good and the bad. And I think that's really important to kind of reflect on what worked and what didn't. You know, so for the session, I'm just going to like talk a little bit about, I suppose, my earlier stage academic endeavors, you know, be they primary and secondary, and I suppose how that's kind of shaped where I've gone and what I've done, and you know, the impact I guess it's had even on me today as a 38-year-old. And I think that's really important to reflect on, because in thinking about today's session, it kind of brought me back. It brought me back to when I was 10 or 11 years of age in terms of that primary school experience. And like I said a few moments ago, I'm 38. It seems like an awful long time ago when I was in primary school. And interestingly, when I talk to kids that are there now, obviously the experiences are different, but the overlaps in terms of the feelings or the experiences in some regard are somewhat similar. And I just think for me, if there's anything we can do about changing that experience, it's happening, I know, for lots of people, and I'm sure the people on this call, the parents or the educators or the adults, you know, there's lots of people, and we're almost talking to the converted in terms of the people that are on this session. So just to kind of bring you back, I'm sure you got it from my accent already. I'm from Cork, we're originally from Cloyne, just outside Middleton, and I went to a really nice local primary school, great environment. And as a kid, you know, I didn't see myself as being any different. I genuinely just felt I was a little bit slow, because that was kind of the term that we used back then, right? I felt I was a little bit slow, and that was okay because, you know, there was a few of us in it and we were all sort of going to remedial class together, and it was all okay. And I mean, to be honest, when we got called out in the middle of the day or whatever it used to be, I almost saw it as an opportunity to not be in class, you know, like that was just the way it was. And having, obviously I have dyslexia, but ADHD as well, any opportunity to get up from my desk and get away from what was not the most enjoyable experience in terms of a primary school setting, but yet my experience as a whole in primary school was actually really enjoyable. Like I loved the school, the teachers were fantastic, loved playing sport, hurling, football was kind of where I was at. But again, I think it was because there was a number of us kind of in that same situation where, like, I mean, it's sort of embarrassing now when I look back at my like copybooks that my mother kept, or stuff, you know, reports that came home. I mean, my writing and my spelling at that early stages was so poor. It's kind of, I find it's a struggle even to kind of talk about it, because I think it kind of brings me back there and it makes me feel in the way I probably felt in those situations. So like I say, primary was kind of standard enough. I had no desire to go to college, to go to university. I genuinely had absolute, I was absolutely set on leaving in junior cert year, because I guess, you know, where I was from, some of my family had done it, some of my friends had done it, you know, people at school had done it. And I was like, you know what, my journey is, I'm literally going to get out the door as soon as I possibly can. And, you know, lots of options. My dad is farming. I was either going to do something in that line. I was going to do a trade or a mechanic, or, you know, something that I felt I could kind of get into and just get me out of school. Because that's kind of the way, I suppose, that's where I was at. And you know, like when I reflect back now, the things that always stick out to me are the Friday spelling test. And we've all been there. We all kind of talk about it. But genuinely, you know, been made stand in the corner, you know, for an hour because you didn't get your spellings right in the morning, and it was like the 4th week in a row that you got 1 out of 10. But I genuinely say this really honestly, in that like it was normal because it happened all the time. So I normalized it to death. And I guess my parents had me quite young, and so like they were just concerned with raising me as opposed to like heavily involved in my schooling, you know, and no fault of their own. They were, like I said, they were young when they had me. And so it just was that was the way it was. And again, like family experiences weren't such, you know, my mom did her leaving cert just about, my dad didn't, none of my family would have went to college. It wasn't really like the done thing. And so kind of to bring it a few steps forward, it went into really nice secondary school. I picked a CBS school, just a Christian brother school, mainly because of hurling. Nothing to do with the academics or whatever else. I wanted to play hurling for this particular school, and some of my friends had gone there and whatever else. But again, I also remember the entrance exam, and like doing really poorly, obviously, in the entrance exam, because, you know, it was written, and I struggled to read the questions in terms of the actual exam, or, you know, the submission. So they, again, at that time, it was kind of a time where we would have looked at students and graded them. So we had 4 or 5 kind of intakes of students coming into first year, and they would have been graded on the results, obviously, of our intake. So I ended up in whatever the lower tiered class was. And again, what happens there when I went into first year is you kind of fall in, like a few of my friends had come from my primary, but you fall into the group, right? You fall into being a bit of a messer, and, you know, getting in a little bit of trouble and all the things that go with that. And it became normal, but then it was expected of you because you were in that group, and you said, I'm going to play up to this because this is what they expect me to do, so I'll do it. And again, obviously my parents were concerned, but they were more concerned that I was causing trouble as opposed to, you know, the educational part of it. And like I always, again, have memories of getting my first year report card back from first year. And I think I probably failed 5, if not 6 of my first year subjects, getting 12% in science, you know, but that was where I was at. And I didn't really care. I genuinely did not care personally, because I was like, 2 years, I'm out of here, I'm done. And I also have this memory, actually, she's still teaching there, or she might be close to retirement right now, but there was this fantastic teacher, Marjorie Ryan was her name. She's a lovely, lovely lady. I think she's still at the school. But she saw something in me, obviously, in when I went into second year. And again, it was tiered, so I was in the lower classes, but I was doing relatively well in science. I just happened to really love science and business and some of those kind of subjects. And she was like, Jesus, if I actually read the questions to him and let him speak it out, he's not too bad. And this was, you know, ever before, I suppose reasonable accommodations were kind of coming in, but not really. And in fairness, she just did this for all my exams. And I ended up passing first and foremost, but then I ended up actually doing relatively well. And it was kind of this internal, it almost built up a level of confidence or self-belief in myself and my own ability. And then other teachers saw, Jesus, you know, he got 60 in science. Maybe if I do this for geography, it might work. And I was really, really lucky that it wasn't the drive of my parents going in there and
Sorry, James, did your audio just dip there?
Is that okay?
Yeah, we're back now. Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Sorry to
not at all, not at all. My mic here just finished up for some reason. But yeah, so I think, you know, that's what kind of started happening, was people started kind of believing in me. There was a bit more belief in myself, and that's kind of where it went. And we had this thing, and it's again, like, not a lot of schools are doing it now or have done it since, but every year they took 4 students from the lower tiered classes and moved them up into the top tier classes. So basically it was based on your Christmas exams of your second year. And I ended up doing relatively well in my exams across the board. And so they took 4 of us out of the bottom classes and moved 4 down that had done poorly. And it was again, it was one of those like golden moments that I
you know, I reflect on now as being so important to me in terms of where I am now. But because I moved into a class with students that were, I'm going to say, were better than me, or were more, you know, were as intelligent or more, or were doing well. And so I was like, you know what, this is actually the way I'm going to do it now. And it really worked well for me to be in that sort of ecosystem with people that were excelling. Now, I was kind of struggling a little bit, obviously, at the same time, but regardless, I settled into that. And it was because I started like passing exams and doing okay in up into junior cert year. I was like, maybe I'll actually give this leaving cert thing a go. And that's like, genuinely, it was that kind of flick of a coin. Had I not moved up in that second year, I probably would have left in third year. You know, so it's so funny that the choices that we make, and a lot of it, if you think about it, a lot of it stems back to that one teacher thinking there's something with this kid, and you know, she probably doesn't even know it, doesn't even think about it. But like, it was that one moment in science lab where she said, I'm gonna write these exams for him. That was the clinical, like that was the absolute moment that meant I went on and did what I did versus not. And that's really important if you're an educator, or if you're a parent that has the ability to potentially, you know, push that within the school if it's not something that's been done. But from there, I did transition year in school, and again, like, that gave me a little bit of downtime. It allowed me to do things that I probably felt I was better at doing. So, you know, like, we did mini company. We ended up winning the national mini company. We went to Moscow and represented Ireland and won that. And again, I was like sales director, and I loved it. Like, I was all over it, presentations, speaking. That was kind of what I did, and I really enjoyed it. Now, could I write even the name of our company at the time? No, I couldn't, but it didn't matter because I had people on the team that would do that part, and I would do the part I was good at. And so then I ended up doing my leaving cert. In terms of the college experience, it's kind of interesting actually to reflect on that, seeing as I'm now working in a university setting. I can talk about that a little bit later. But again, I had no great plan in terms of what I was going to do. You know, I just was like, I'm going to try and get as good a leaving cert as I possibly can. And you know, it was around the time where it was just pre-reasonable accommodations in some institutions. So I opted to go to CIT in Cork, which is now MTU. And it was just before, I'd say a year or two before, they actually got like a more solid disability support unit set up there. And so I went from doing relatively well in school and then into this ecosystem that had no support whatsoever, you know, as in, like, you're a student, you're independent, you should be able to do these things. And I didn't do well at all. I ended up failing actually quite badly in CIT my first year, and was skipping a lot of college, wasn't really turning up for stuff at all. And the turning point in my CIT career was I played hurling there. And so hurling was kind of where it was at. And aside from the hurling, I didn't have much going on there outside of maybe social life. But I got sent off in a match, which I believe it, against Mary of all colleges. And we were winning really, really well. I got sent off. I got taken off because we were winning quite well. And there's this little bit of a brawl broke out. And of course, you know, I went in there to kind of support some of my team members, and some fella hit me, and anyway, the rest is history. But I ended up getting sent off in this game, so I could no longer play for CIT. And I was like, well, I might as well drop out. Like, what am I going to do here at college? So I ended up dropping out for 2 years. And I again, like, I kind of, not that I got quite, you know, to say I was depressed is the wrong word, but like that I saw all my friends and schoolmates and people at college going on and doing stuff well, and I just wasn't quite there with them, and I felt I wasn't able. I was like, this college thing isn't for me. I obviously have now found out this is it. They've found me. I stayed at home. Like, I moved back home, didn't do much for a few months really, if I'm honest, and then I just were like, you know what, I just better pick up some sort of a job so that my mother can get me out the door. And I did car valeting for a while. You know, I worked in bars, did car valeting. I, you know, worked as a labourer for a good while. Actually, that was a good experience. And then I was like, you know what, I'll chance. I was doing car valeting on the side as well. And so I was probably 18, 19 at the time. And like, it was that early Celtic Tiger kind of times. Money was good. And I went into car sales, and honest to goodness, it was the best move I made for those 2 years, because, you know, at 19, I had a company car, paid for phone, making really good commission. and selling cars, and it was fantastic. Like, what an opportunity. But the kind of, in terms of the dyslexia experience, like I struggled so badly with names, recognizing names, but like I'd recognize the person, no problem. But I could go out on the lot and I could kick the tires with you. I could talk the spec of the car, no problem. But I could never spell your name, not even your first name, not even your surname. And it was really embarrassing that I what we call logbooks back then, but like basically the registration cert of the car, I would have to read the address of the person, and I would like, man, I don't know what this is. And it's really embarrassing for me to share that, but that genuinely was the way it was. And what I tried to do there when I was in car sales was kind of strike up this relationship with the secretary. So she was really good. I was like, look, I'm selling cars, so how about like every week I might sell between 2 and 4 cars a week, which is really, really good. But then I'd have to do the paperwork for that car, and I would really struggle to write that stuff up. So I would try to come up with all sorts of tactics. I would put like the laptop, where we had like large desktops, actually, the desktop between you, if you bought a car from me, and I would kind of randomly scribble the details. And then, you know, I'd ring my sister and I'd say, you know, the person that lives out by wherever, because it was local, right? So she might know the person, and she goes, oh yeah, that's, you know, that's whoever. And she would literally spell that person's name out to me there and then. And so that was kind of working for a little while, but not obviously very, very well, because firstly, she might know who bought the car, so that we were in trouble. So with the secretary, she would fill out all the details on the application form, on the finance. We're selling out of finance as well at the time. Sell the finance, fill in all the registration forms, and I would give her a percentage of my commission for that car. And it was win-win. So like all I had to do was sell the cars, and then I had this person help me in the background. And again, I suppose the learning from that is, it's about the ecosystem that you build around yourself. It's the support that you build for yourself. And of course there's a level of embarrassment about not being able to spell and read, and you know, my timekeeping, all that sort of stuff is still poor to this day. But regardless, like, I cannot get over the fact that I can work really, really hard to try and improve my spelling marginally, or else I can focus on the things that I'm actually very good at. And it's only as I get a little bit older that I've realized that. But if I reflect back, like when I dropped out that time as well, I was like, there has to be something wrong with how I was taught spelling and reading. That's what it is. You know, I guess obviously I had a diagnosis, but I was like, no, there has to be something. They just didn't teach me right in school. And so I actually went back and I did that national learning, what's it called? Basically, it was like a spell, read, write. It was kind of like a TV program, and you sent away and you got the book, and you would like fill in the workbook, and you would go along. And I went to these basically like really basic courses in some of the local schools, you know, people that hadn't their junior cert or leaving cert. And I was like, I'll start from the basics and try to learn spelling and reading again. And you know, they did all these simple things. And again, like, I actually saw, I found this stuff maybe just a few years ago in my parents' attic, and they made me keep a diary for 3 months. And like, it was almost like my 3.5-year-old here had written the diary. It was so basic, because I couldn't spell half of the words. So I would just like write down the most basic things I could think of. Today it was cold. I'm like, oh my God, I'm fucking 19. How is it? This is what I could write. But again, like, I didn't really have technology per se at that time, or didn't have it easily accessible. So I suppose, you know, I was working really well, but then I saw friends, people that I gone to school with. My now wife was in UCC, was going to college, and God, I think I could actually have a bash off this. And I went in there and I met with the disability support that were relatively well established, and a fantastic lady in there who has since passed, but like Janet Thomas, and she was just phenomenal, like in terms of helping me and supporting me write the application to come into UCC. And I kind of always had a bit of a chip in my shoulder when I went into UCC, because I had failed previously, and I always had this thing like, this is the next class, or this next assignment, or this next test. That's when I'm gonna mess up. And obviously it didn't happen. But I think what it did to me in UCC is it made me study an awful lot more. It made me focus on things, again, like I said, that I was good at. And I ended up getting, you know, one degree, went on to do a master's in UCD, and then took several kind of jobs in between those periods. But again, I do think, being an adult with dyslexia, I probably didn't take the opportunities that arose sometimes. You know, for example, because I did really well in my undergrad, I got offered a position at Accenture, which is a big consultancy company, and my wife works for them, actually has been for 10 plus years. And I got offered a pretty good role there, and a grad role and all sorts. And I didn't take it because I was like, I don't think I'm good enough. I genuinely, I'll go in there, I'll be there 2 or 3 months, and they'll realize that I can't spell, and they'll realize I can't, read, and I'll be out. And so I genuinely do think it stopped me in terms of those sort of opportunities. I often reflect back and think, if I had taken that opportunity with Accenture, where would I be now 10, 12 years later? Because I think my ability to present and to connect with people would have been fantastic, but I was so fearful. Like, I had this massive fear that at any given moment they would catch me, and I think that's kind of why I turned to doing all sorts. Like, even when I finished in UCC, I didn't want to take any grad jobs because I was like, oh my god, I don't want to do it because they'll catch me. And it's funny now to tell this story, because this is kind of like really in the years of my life, and if I start crying at any moment, you'll know why. But no, joking. But on a serious note, like, I didn't want to take that role, like those grad roles. I got offered 3 or 4 grad roles because I had a really good degree, but I ended up driving wedding cars and chauffeur cars for like a year and a half after college, because I was like, I love this. I can drive the cars, and I was doing all sorts. Of course, my experience of tech, and I pretty much ran that company for that guy, and I would drive wedding cars on Saturdays. I would chauffeur people from large multinational companies to the airport. I did all that sort of work for about a year and a half after college, because I just didn't want to take up a grad role. So I was always kind of just battling with that imposter syndrome, even though I didn't really think that's what it was back then. And then I took on, I actually got offered a position in UCD. And again, it was one of those positions where I didn't have to go through the rigors of the interview process per se. It kind of happened in a roundabout way. I got the position, and there was flexibility in it. It was almost like an entrepreneurial type of position. It was kind of more project led, so I could come and go, do it in my own hours. And it worked relatively well. And I took that position in UCD, and it was fine for a while. And I because then I had been using assistive tech and technology for a while, I was like, you know what, there's something here. And I was like, if I reflect back 15, 20 years ago, when I was kind of 7 through 10, what would have been the most helpful thing I could have got? It was to be able to use technology to scaffold my learning a little bit better. And so that's why I set up Urability, to be honest. I set that up when I was in UCD, and it was very much a part-time, kind of like, this is kind of something fun to do. A few colleagues in UCD set up with me. We used the computer centers, and it's amazing. We did that for 5 years. We ran summer camps for kids, predominantly with dyslexia, DCD, some kids with ASD, and we did it in lots and lots of places. But it started in UCD, really, and I was quite proud, obviously, of setting that up. Really enjoyed it. And off the back of that, I kind of said, well, you know what, I need to better myself in terms of my assistive technology and disability understanding. So I did a master's in rehabilitation and disability, or just disability studies as it's known now, in the School of Psychology in UCD. And that was a great 2 years of learning. We learned an awful lot in terms of engaging with people, and just to kind of like have disability. But again, like I certainly struggled through that master's, but I came out the other side. And that's kind of where Urability became a bit more. So I was like, will I stay here in UCD and do this job, or will I kind of double down a little bit on Urability? And it's great to reflect on these things. Like, maybe I should have stayed in UCD, and who knows what I'd be doing now. But that's the flick of the coin you have. You just don't know. And I think you have to trust your gut in many, many instances. And there's many things I would do differently in terms of my last 15 years, but here we are. And I think for me, taking that kind of road in terms of like focusing on Urability, like the enjoyment that it's brought me in terms of the families. Like, I genuinely have met kids that were in first year that came on our summer camps that are now in college in UCC or MTU, and it's just great to see that. Like, I see them on campus, and they're, it's just great to meet them now, because I'm working in UCC. But like, there's obviously that benefit, and there's a number of families that I've worked with for years. Like, I mean, since kids were in mid-stage primary, now it's just great to see them evolve over time. And I kind of do that thing where I take on I've been doing it for a while now, since we haven't really been doing any kind of one-to-one work, but I would take on like what I call like almost pet projects, for want of a better word, and so that I work specifically, because I think what happens is parents often send me an email or schools, and I see the situation, I say, Jesus, that was my situation, you know, as in I almost feel like I'm back there when I'm 11 or whatever it is, and I'm like, Jesus, I really want to help this kid, I want to help that family. And so I almost put myself in that position, and parents probably get me on that regard. But no, it's just really, it's really rewarding to be able to do that. And with Urability, we kind of went full time. Actually, I went on Dragon's Den at that time. So it was 2014. So 2014, 15, I think I went on Dragon's Den because, you know, not that I necessarily wanted the money or the investment, but it was just to build a bit of awareness, and it was mainly around the summer camps. We were selling tech, we were doing a few other things as well at that time. So went on Dragon's Den, and it was actually really, really funny experience. So I went on and, you know, so sold it from the you know, like the poor boy with no shoes, couldn't read kind of a situation. That was kind of like my pitch, Maria. And what's his name, Gavin, whatever it is, can't even surname now. It'll come to you there in a few seconds, but whatever, you know the chap I'm talking about. So Gavin's on here, and he's, you know, he's like, you don't see it when you see it on TV, whatever, but they're all in front of you. There's like multiple cameras, and he's like checking his phone and all sorts. Like when I'm giving my like proper pitch, so he doesn't even hear probably what I'm talking about, and so he just kind of turns back up and he looks at me. He's like, Northridge, that's an unusual one, isn't it? It's an unusual name. And I'm like, yeah, it's a little bit unusual. It's like, you might spell that for me there, would you? And of course, like there was this utter like breakout of laughter, because obviously I told the story that I couldn't spell my surname and blah blah blah, and then he goes on to ask me to spell my surname. It was just one of those really funny moments, and all I could think of was like, God, this is going to be TV gold. Like they'll have to show this. This will be epic. And unfortunately, they cut the whole segment out, which was a disaster. But anyway, we ended up getting the money and getting a fantastic investor in Barry O'Sullivan. And you know, like all these experiences kind of go on, but I think I did a lot of things with Urability. We tried to make that experience work. I was probably a little bit early at that time, like in 2014, 15, with online courses and membership, and it's not till 5 years later that it really became a really powerful thing. But I think I got the opportunity to do a Marie Curie research fellowship. So I don't know if anyone knows what that is. In academic circles, it's probably a little bit more prestigious. In regular circles, when I tell my mom, she's like, oh, he's going back to college. You know, so it means very little to some people. It means a lot to others. But basically, it's a quite prestigious fellowship program that's typically postdoctorate. You know, and I don't have my PhD. So I got offered this position, and the acceptance rate is like 2% of all applicants get accepted. So I was like, my God, I got accepted. I have to go. And it was with UMass Medical School and MIT in Boston. And they really made, like, they sold it really well. And I was like, you know what, I'll just shut down Urability, and like I'll stall it for like 2 or 3 years, go do this, and I'll come back. And I think what happened when I took that fellowship, that the imposter syndrome that had been like on my shoulder for a while and had been put to bed pretty well, because I had a really good support network, and I focused on what I was good at, and I had staff working in Urability that like would spell stuff for me, or I would, again, at that stage I was married, or I was certainly engaged. So I would take pictures. If I was going to meet somebody, I'd take a picture of their door. I would take a picture of their business card and send it to my wife and ring her and say, like, what's this person's name? And like that was the level I was at. But then 2016, 17, I went to America, and my wife didn't come with me initially. She came a few months later, and it's really interesting now to reflect on it, because like it was one of these moments where fuck it, the wheels came off in terms of myself and my self-confidence. And I think there was 40 fellows from across Europe selected for this fellowship, and I was one of 2 Irish, but I was the only one without a PhD. And so a lot of them had lots of experience, and obviously they had PhDs. And I was like, oh my God, here I am. Like, I'm a fraud. Like, they're going to find me out. And then they'll fucking find out that I've got dyslexia. Excuse my language. But then they'll find out I've got dyslexia, and I'll really be done. And so I spent the first 3 or 4 months really trying to stay on top of, you know, stuff that I was doing and trying to reading. And of course, if you think about, I mean, it's not to say that people with dyslexia can't do research. Of course they can. And loads that I know have and do. But it's probably just a bit more of a challenge, and it's about setting yourself up right. And because I'd come in at the deep end, obviously if you do your PhD, you go through that motion, you learn how to read papers, you learn to do research, you learn all those things. Whereas I was on the other side of that, and I was expected to be able to do, ethical applications. I was expected to be able to do all these things, which were completely new to me. Like even reading those words, I struggled. And I was under a really, really interesting guy over at UMass Medical. It was within the place called the Eustace Kennedy Shriver Center. So JFK's sister and sister-in-law, I guess, basically set up the Special Olympics, but they funded this really big program called the Kennedy Shriver Center. So I was working within the Kennedy Shriver Center, so I was really esteemed, and it was just a really good opportunity to be there. But I struggled because I couldn't spell a lot of their names. Not am I good at spelling there. I didn't even know what their first names were. And my professor was a chap called William McIlvany. All right, nothing too complex, you think there. But every time somebody would say, "Who you working with?" or "Who's your supervisor?" my brain would just go blank, and I could not read it. I couldn't get it off the top. It was in my brain somewhere. I could see it, but I just couldn't say it. And it was so frustrating. And then I would go to write down details, and I would struggle. And look, reading road signs is still a bit of a challenge for me. And whereas here, I knew every street in Dublin when I was living there. I knew all the places. I would learn them off by heart. I just couldn't really read them. Whereas then I went to Boston, and of course they all speak a little bit like sharp and stuff, and I struggled to kind of just engage. And I think, again, like I said there a few moments ago, that's probably when the wheels kind of came off, and I really kind of went into myself, I would say, before my wife came. And I was massively struggling in my self-belief, and I was like, God, I'm an absolute fraud, and this imposter syndrome has got me. And I suppose I'd stepped out of like a massive comfort zone in Dublin, doing lots of, having lots of friends around me, and then moving here and having nothing, and then trying to kind of build that up again. Again, on reflection now, like that was 3 or 4 years ago, on reflection now, it's probably when I started having just like, I won't say, just reflecting on who I am as a person, and what I'm about, and what I've achieved. And I have this constant thing of like, I've not achieved enough. Like I'm not to say that I'm not enough, but I've not achieved enough. And the line was very fine there, for me, the line of like, am I enough because I haven't achieved these things? So there's this, and not to say that that's specific for dyslexia, but it certainly, when I reflect on it now, and I was telling this to the ladies before, when we did a pre-call maybe a few days ago, like the last 2 years, just kind of pre-lockdown, or just the start of it, actually before lockdown, if I'm honest, I was like, I'm gonna have to do something about this, because I need to get on top of it, like in terms of where my brain was at, where my mind was at. And if you looked at it and you looked at it on paper, you'd say, you know what, he's doing really well. He's got a undergrad, he's got a master's, he's got a fellowship, he's got a few staff in a company, and now I'm a project manager at UCC with a staff there. But at the same time, like mentally, I just couldn't wrap my head around that I was enough to be doing that, or good enough, or I was always going to be found out, or something was going to happen. And my mind would just run away from me, especially like late in the evenings into the night. And then like the ADHD would just kind of take over, and my mind would just like almost be exploding. It's really difficult to explain that. But that's kind of where I was at. And I was like, you know what, I need to do something with this. I need to get on top of it, because here am I talking to families and talking to kids and telling them what they could and should be doing. And I'm kind of not doing what I'm telling others to do. And that's really important. And especially when I have kids myself. So I went back to a psychologist, and I literally was going like every week for months, like absolute months. And I would have never, if you'd have asked me before I went into it, like what did I think was the trigger, what was going on, and like a lot of it stems back to that 3rd, 4th class experience of being that kid in the corner who was slow, and I genuinely would never say that about teachers or education. But from all the work that I've done over the last while, like whenever we do that work, that's where it brings me, and that's the feeling that sits with me. And I think any adults on this session with dyslexia undoubtedly, I think, have similar experiences and similar feelings that it kind of stems back to something. So for me, the technology obviously is a way to get on top of that, and it's a way to scaffold. Not to say that it's going to improve your learning, of course, in your kids it can to a degree, but for me now it's just about scaffolding where I'm at. But I think for a long time I probably just put the lid on where I was at, you know, and a lot of that stemmed from my learning experiences, and I think it's just so important that we if I could go back, you know, like 20 odd years, 25 years, goodness, it would be to say, like, focus on those things that you're really good at. So what is it that you're really good at that you can do? You know, and again, like I shared maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago, like I thought I can reteach myself spelling and reading, whereas in reality I couldn't. Had I really dug into things I was good at that stage, like presenting, like dealing with people, like, you know, like I loved business, I loved account, you know, there was a lot of those things I was really good at, but I didn't put extra time into those. I did extra grinds in English, like I bust my ass to try and pass Irish. And on a reflection, you're like, my God, to what end? You know, to what end? To the end that I probably didn't do it well in the things I could have done better in. But that's just where we're at, and there's no going back. But I think there's moving forward, and it's just about, you know, the way I often think about it now is it's about being comfortable with the uncomfortable and being comfortable about past experiences, and we can't constantly reflect on that. And I'm very happy to share it on this session, but I don't use it as a poor me, right? Like, that isn't the way at all, because I'm conscious that we have a mix of people here. Probably have some teachers, you know, some parents, those with adults. It depends, and people will be watching this back afterwards. But I can't say it strongly enough. It's, if you're the parent of a child, it's like, dig into whatever that kid loves to do, like 110%, like dig into it, and obviously advocate for them, again, 110%, because that's needed. And, you know, our education system is what it is, and we have some fantastic people in it that are so driven. Like I deal with teachers that, like, outside of their working day, that are like trying to wrap their head around technology, that come to us, that, you know, are so invested. So invested, and we see the people that are doing the courses with the, you know, like there's monstrous work and there's monstrous change, but at the same time, it's the system in many ways that's broken. You know, it's not the people within it, but it's the system that you have to conform to, and I think that's where the complication is. But if there's anything that you can do, it is obviously to, I won't go on because I'm conscious of time as well, but I won't go on massively about I won't go on massively about assistive tech and stuff. We can, I'm happy to share stuff back afterwards. We can send it out. But there's one thing I will say, and that is, if I get one email a day, I would say it is the Assistive Technology grant, right? So if you're a parent or a teacher or whatever, if your child needs technology to access the curriculum, if they need technology to move them on, put that whatever you have at home, whatever's available in the school, just start using it from day one. Like, once it's recommended, or once it's because that grant is never going to be a silver bullet. It's never going to be a thing that fixes everything. It's, you know, it's actually just going to add stress and strain to you as a teacher, or as a parent, and certainly the child is going to lose out on that level of learning. And we have so much now that's mainstream, so much that's probably sitting on the phone or laptop or tablet that you have, be it a Chromebook. Like, there's phenomenal stuff that's out there, but it's just about using it and integrating it and becoming comfortable with it. And I think that's probably one of the key parts on technology. Like, we could go on forever. We could talk about loads of apps, and we could talk about, you know, stuff, but you know, we have a really good app guide. You're more than welcome. People are more welcome to jump on that, or just we've loads of stuff on our blog. I'm happy to share that back. But for me, the core piece, I suppose, out of the session is, for parents, is to kind of just reflect, and adults that are on this, is to reflect, what are you good at now, and what can we move forward. And we can't constantly reflect or replay where we were, right? Like, we can't, because it does nothing to us. It's kind of like, what are you working on now to move yourself forward? And I genuinely have to work, I would say, every day to be better, you know, like to be better tomorrow. And all I do now is just compare myself to what I was yesterday and what I am tomorrow. And for me, it's those small things, like, aside from dyslexia, more on the ADHD stuff. I mean, again, I've toyed with going back and getting or going back on medication, but I'm kind of over and back, you know, like it doesn't impact me as much if I do certain things really well, you know. So if I get my sleep, if I'm eating relatively well, if I'm exercising, like I need to be exercising, you know, like I run 2 or 3 times a week. I hit the gym like 3, if not 4 times a week, because that stuff, it literally just makes my brain level. And I very much would know if I did not do that for 3, 4, 5 days, like I'd be quite frantic is the wrong word, but I'd be very worked up, I guess, in terms of my ability to be able to think and my ability to be able to reflect on what I'm trying to do over the week or over the month. And so that's kind of a very long story in terms of where I'm at. But yeah, so like where I'm at right now, just so people know, I am the project manager for inclusive UCC. So I work for UCC and I run Urability. But a phenomenal opportunity to go back into the university that I came out of and use the services there. And really now it's about mainstreaming digital accessibility, digital content, like making the learning environment as universal as we possibly can. And it's great to be, I suppose, at the leading edge of that. We've a large 3-year project that's running, and I genuinely think it's going to make massive impact. It'd be lovely to be able to try to do it in primary and secondary, but certainly we'll do it at a tertiary level now and see where it lands from there. So I think I've talked for long enough. So what I might do is we'll jump in and take a few questions. Does that work for you guys, or have you anything that you'd like to ask or add or probe or whatever is the correct term there?
No, I think first of all, just thank you so much. That was such a fantastic talk, but so open and honest. And that's not always easy to do. You know, we give ourselves a little piece of ourselves every time you deliver a talk like this. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure I echo what everyone says. You know, fantastic, wonderful, powerful
Not at all,
talk.
my pleasure.
Yeah, and I'm sure many dyslexic adults who are here tonight or are watching this back later can really relate, to a lot that you've mentioned there. Perfect. Thank you.
I guess just in terms of dyslexic adults, I mean, I go through this still even, and I talk about it all the time, but I try not to use it as an excuse in many ways, but it's still there. Like you can't, like this better than many and more than I, but you can't get away from it, right? Like that's the bottom line. And so you have to be accepting of where you're at. And whether you tell people about it or not, that's okay too. But like there's always the classic moments, and like I'll give you one really good example. Like I typically get asked, this is a hilarious thing. A lot of my friends that are getting married or whatever, like, oh, James would love to do a reading. He loves presenting. He'll be great. And I'm like, the difference between doing a presentation and doing a reading at mass is very, very fucking different. So I one that just comes to mind, and a friend of mine asked me to do a reading. So I go up to do the reading. Obviously, I had the reading beforehand, and I'm prepping like for a few days prior. It's relatively short reading. I don't know what exactly, maybe a few paragraphs, not too major. So, but there was a few words in there that I literally could not remember. I just constantly was forgetting these specific words in the reading. And like, so I was in the church. I'd ask my wife, she'd say it. I'm like, oh yeah, I got it. 2 minutes later, it's gone. I can't even see what the word is. So I always had this memory. This is just not too long ago, but I go up on the altar and I start saying it, and it's working out relatively well. But I get to 1 or 2 of those words, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just gonna have to replace this word with something else, as opposed to stall over the word. But I always have this memory of kind of just out the corner of my eye, I could see the priest just give me this dagger look. He's like, that wasn't the fucking reading he was meant to say. But sometimes you just have to get, like, there was no ability for me. Maybe I could have took my iPad or my phone up there, I guess. There's always ways around that, but I think it's owning it. It's owning the dyslexia and the ADHD and being part of it, not using it necessarily as and I say that with the best possible meaning, but like as an excuse, but more so that and I'm not on the line of like it's a superpower either. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh my God, this is my ultimate superpower and I'm a superhero. But like it genuinely does make me do things a little bit differently. And that's a good thing. And I think we probably do need to buy into that. There's a halfway house there that we do need to buy into it a little bit. Because I very, very, very much do things a little bit differently, I'm sure. And even in my work in UCC, I'm like, I'm really going to dig into this, but I'm going to do it in terms of what's good for me. So it's about constantly meeting people. I'm like, I'd say my coffee bill for the week, because I go meet people. I'm like, I meet them for coffee, or we do Teams, or we do Zooms, or whatever it is. And it's just about building relationships, because that's what I'm good at. And then the people that work on my team do a lot of the more admin stuff, maybe that I probably should be doing, but I I front load with a lot of stuff that I know I'm good at, and I know I can get us across the line quicker in terms of general communication.